हुआ है चल
एक गोल है to just press go to it yeah
আমি লাইভ
goal है to just press go to it yeah
আমি লাইভ হয় হ্যালো আমি লাইভ হয়েছি
So hi and welcome everyone to another session in the IIM Technical Lecture Series. Today we are very lucky to have with us Mr. Rajarshi Sarma, who is the program head of Northeast Entrepreneurship Development Program for IIM Calcutta Innovation Park. And he'll be giving us a talk titled Starting and Growing a Startup in the Technology Space. So a very short introduction about sir. So he is currently heading the Northeast Entrepreneurship Development Program for IIM Calcutta, as mentioned. And he is an alumnus of IIM Bangalore and NIT Rourkela and has a corporate and startup experience of over 12 years. In his past roles, he headed the Northeast business for companies like Swiggy, Moglix and Delhivery. So without any further ado, we'd like to hand it over to Rajarshi Sharma, sir.
Hi, thank you, Abhigyan, for the wonderful introduction, and hello to all who is joining this session on startups in the technology space. Now, let me, since I have been associated with this world of startups for quite some time now. Initially, I tried out with my own startups. Then I had the opportunity to run some of the unicorn startups for Northeast region, and then now I am part of.
Abhigyan, I think we are back live. So yes. So sorry for the interruption. So sorry, sir. You can kindly proceed.
Do I need to continue or should I stop?
We missed out maybe about 20 seconds, sir. If you don't mind, you can. Yeah.
Yeah. So first, let me try to point out what exactly is a startup, and especially how this term startup came into so much of popularity that we see nowadays. With a lot of different interest groups, there are newspapers talking about startups. There are governments taking lots of initiatives in the startup ecosystem, and everywhere we hear about this term startups. But this was not the case maybe when Indian startup story began with this company called as Flipkart. Right? So back in the days of around 2007, people didn't even know that there exists this term called as startups, and it was then and it is now. If you see this journey of startups, and we have achieved actually quite a lot. And all the ecosystem players, be it the startup founders, be it investors, be it the ecosystem players like the incubators, everyone had the role to play in this journey. Now, while defining what a startup is, so there is a government defined version of a startup. It should not, which has laid down a certain number. Starting from that, the startup cannot be 10 years, more than 10 years old. It has to work on innovation. And so these are the primary two criteria which a startup should be having. And it should not be something related to a traditional business. So if we take this definition into account, it's not not a totally different thing what startup versus what we see a normal day-to-day business. Only thing is that there is some part of innovation which comes into existence, and also we see a much higher growth rate. So if you see the most popular startups, names like Swiggy, names like Flipkart, or let's say Uran. So these all companies grew at a pace which is like could never have been possible for anyone to imagine maybe some 10-15 years back. Just to give you an example, Uran became a unicorn within just a matter of 2 years, I think. So in 2 years, building a company from zero to 7,000 or 8,000 crore rupees valuation. So that is something which was unimaginable in the past. And this kind of a growth becomes possible only when there is an aspect of technology into it. Because otherwise, if it is a physical business, it is really difficult to scale that way. So that is the reason why all the big startups that we know of today, if you see, most of these startups has identified a business problem and they have integrated technology to solve it, and with the help of that technology, they have grown to a massive scale. Taking the name of Flipkart started, it's just a retail store, right? So retail is not something new. It is everywhere, right? So retail is probably one of the oldest trades known to humankind. But still, what Flipkart brought in was the technology domain. It introduced e-commerce into India. The same thing, Swiggy, right? So Swiggy or Zomato. So both these companies, they changed this on food delivery, which was probably into existence since a long time, but it was happening through a totally unorganized channel. So they totally organized it. They built a model through which this can be increased exponentially, and that's how their business model was built. So if you see all these companies, so the core of this business model is always this idea or the identification of a market need. In this case, in the case of Flipkart, it was the ability to for a user to see a massive catalog, which usually we cannot see in a normal grocery store. Sure. So whatever we can see in Amazon or Flipkart, so the kind of catalog that we can see there, it is just impossible to see in a physical store. So that's what probably was the market need, and along with it also comes lots of convenience. Then getting the convenience in terms of getting the item in at our doorsteps. Then also the ability to compare different items. So all those kind of convenience factors also kicked in. So with all these things with all these examples basically, so the first step of building a startup is usually a business problem. So in the technology domain, and like I said, all these companies and in fact, if we call about startup, a lot of people actually think that technology is the only space where startups can be built. Although this is not true, but if we see maybe 90 to 95% companies that we categorize as startups are actually have some bit of technology in some form or the other. It can be a food brand, but they are using technology in their supply chain. And if it can be a logistics company, but they are using technology for tracking their orders. It can be a trucking company, and they are using technology for to see where the trucks are going, how efficiently they are running. So technology is actually, we can say that maybe because of the time in which we all are in, so technology is probably the single most essential part of this startup ecosystem. And since this group is more or less this group, and also the people who will be watching this video, so probably you have some bit of inclination towards technology. So I would just say that if you are thinking about starting a company or a startup, or eventually, or if you are going to work in a startup, it eventually is the technology which will get the priority over maybe most of the other business functions. That's how things actually happen in most of the startup companies, because technology is a very core and essential part of any startup. So coming back to the startup life cycle, so the startup will always be initiated, or it will always be formed around a business need. Now, this need can be a quite noble need, which maybe it's wherein the product is altogether a new product, or it can be something which can be an already existing product, but some bit of intervention is there, or maybe it can be a new technology. Just if you take the example of Flipkart, that's what it was. It was a normal retailing business, but what Flipkart brought in was the invent of technology. Maybe we can think of a lot of other similar startups wherein the product itself was totally innovative. If you take about the invent of most of the drones, right? So drones, although there are lots of drone companies now, but maybe a few years back there were not so many. So people who invented and who started the different type of drone technology, so they brought into something which is a totally product innovation. So the startup starts with an innovative product or an idea or a business need. So that's what startup started. So now people who got an idea or or identified a need or a problem which they want to solve, and they want to build a business around it. So for that, the first step is to validate the idea, because ideas can be everywhere, and ideas, frankly, ideas doesn't make any difference if we do not validate the assumptions, and if we do not have a plan and execute the same. So that is the reason why it is very important to validate the idea in the first phase. So now, after getting the idea, next step is basically establishing the product market fit. So that is what the startup lingo is for, ensuring that the assumptions that we make during the idea phase are validated with some of the customers. And usually this is made at a very small level with the minimum kind of investment. And if it is a totally technology-based company, it is in fact easier, because we can easily, maybe you can just build a website and we can do some little bit of organic marketing, or maybe some bit of inorganic, but without spending much, and we can just validate the idea. At least we have at a smaller space, with maybe a smaller customer group, we can just validate whether the customers are willing to pay for our products and service or not, or whatever the revenue model is, whether that works or not. So that comes the second part of a startup life cycle. So the first thing is about having the idea. Second thing about establishing the product market fit. And in order to establish the product market fit, what people build is called as a minimum viable product. So it is popularly called as MVP. Now MVP is there's a lot of in the first look, it's a very, very confusing term, right? So when I say MVP, in some cases MVP might not just work, right? So if I talk about, let's say, e-commerce store, so an MVP maybe some bit of, let's say, I want to build a e-commerce store and I want to sell ethnic Assamese jewelries. So in that case, what I'm building the product, what my product is actually not the e-commerce store. My product is actually those jewelries which I want to sell to a target customer group who are maybe outside of Assam. So in that case, an MVP may be as simple as a normal Facebook page or Instagram page from where I'm trying to sell that. And once I see that there actually exists a market for it, my products are into demand, then I go about investing money and building a proper app or a proper website. Right? So that's what minimum viable product is. So this is just an example, and minimum viable product definition can vary from business to business. It can be different for different types of businesses based on sector and all. So the idea is to validate the product market fit with the minimum possible investment. So that is the second part. Where first part we had the idea, second part we validated our assumptions and we ensured that there exists a product market fit. In the third part comes when we build the actual product and we go about marketing it, and we go about finding the customers, then finding initial state of customers, we get our employees, and then we get into a growth stage. So this is how the startup basically begins. Now again, there is a difference between when you talk about the life cycle of a startup and the life cycle of a product of a startup. So, and this eventually happens over a very long period of time. If you see most of the startups always keep innovating. Just to give an example, Zomato, they started with food delivery, but eventually now they tried out multiple different things. In fact, they did not start with food delivery. They start with restaurant listing. and then they got into this food delivery from the restaurants, and then they also tried with grocery delivery. So a lot of other things that they keep trying, and this is because the need of any product, it always goes to phases wherein initially it goes through from the introduction of a product, it grows. I mean, after getting validated in the market, it grows to an extent and it always declines from there. That's what a typical product life cycle is. So a company, if a startup has to be a sustainable company, it always has to keep innovating. Usually it cannot be just one product, or it can be one product, but eventually the product needs to get innovated with new features, new functionalities again and again. So that's how the startup life cycle also can become somewhat similar to product life cycle, but with multiple iterations of the same product. So that's more or less about, theoretically what a startup really means and how a startup kind of works. So starting from the having an idea, getting it validated, to the actual building of the product. Now, more important is the different aspects of the startup ecosystem. Now, when you have an idea, or let's say the very essential thing to in fact all the aspects of building from an idea to a product is the funding. So the money is maybe one of the main ingredients which is needed to, if you want to build an idea into a product. And most of the cases, you're definitely going to need some investment. Now, the investments happen in different forms, right from an idea stage to a very, very mature stage. There can be different types of funding opportunities which can happen. So I'll talk about the funding in detail. But before that, let me also introduce two other types of players in the startup ecosystem. One is incubators, and the second is investors. Now, what is incubator? Incubator has nowadays, maybe again 15 years back, nobody in India could have heard about this term incubator, but now they are just everywhere. Even in Assam, I know of at least some 7-8 different incubators who are working and helping startup with. So just like in the basic function of an incubator is basically to ensure that the journey of a startup from idea phase to a growth phase. So an incubator is there to help in that journey and help with all kind of necessary resources. Now, what are those resources? A lot of people tend to think that the resource can be only money or finance, but it is not. There are a lot of other things that an incubator can bring in. For example, people might lack the know-how of how to manage accounting systems. People might lack know-how of let's say getting the different kind of certifications or getting different kinds of certifications and licenses that is needed. So it can bring in different types of things. So that's when the incubator, usually what they do is they mentor the startups. And when they mentor, it is basically people who are associated with startups who usually mentors them. So someone who already has an experience in, let's say, running a factory. So that person can always guide others how to establish a factory right from the beginning, because there are a lot of steps, nitty-gritties which are involved, which only some person will know who has already done that either, or who has seen the process from a very close circle. So that is one, the mentorship, which is brought in by the startup incubators, which plays a very, very crucial role. Second thing is definitely the funding. So incubators usually tend to help the startups to get raised funding, and also they conduct different types of boot camps, there are different types of classes, etc., using which they teach the founders and the people associated with the startups, and then they help them to manage their business in a better way. Because if it's a startup, it might be at a very small scale, but still you might have to manage all the aspects of business, like accounting, filing of GST, all those kind of things definitely needs to be done, even if it is a startup. So, and that's where the incubators play a very critical part, And then it's a proven thing that the startups who goes through an incubator actually has a better chance of getting successful. So that's about the incubators. The second term which I talked about was the investors. Now again, investors is again a very essential or a very important class of people associated with a startup ecosystem. The reason because they bring in money, right? And money, according to a lot of people, is the single most important thing while running a startup. Although there is lots of other things which are also needed. Only money cannot make a startup successful. That's again a proven thing. But still, it's a popular belief that money is the most important thing. So, however, there are different types of investors who usually tend to invest in a startup. And these typically are people with a higher risk appetite. And when people invest in a higher risk asset, so definitely the expectation of a return also will be accordingly higher. So the first set of investors who brings in at a very early stage is what is known as angel investors. So angel investors are typically they're not funding companies or funding institutions, but they're more or less like individual people who has a decent amount of experience in the corporates, but they have some fund which they want to invest into startups. There are previous startup founders who have exited their company and then they want to invest into startups. So likewise, there are different categories of people called as angel investors. So angel investors typically are the first set of investors which come into the company because they invest at a low amount and they come at a real early phase. So in the initial stages, for example, when the product is maybe at an idea stage, and if it is a technical product, then let's say it is still at an idea stage, people are just building the product. And since while building a technical product, you need to hire developers, you'll be needing money. So maybe then you can approach some of these angel investors. There are lots of angel investment groups. Indian Angel Network is one, which is very active and very popular. Then there are lots of chapters like Mumbai Angels is there. So there are actually lots of angel investment groups. So if you just need to Google, you need to find them in LinkedIn, and you can directly send in your pitch deck, based on which they might call you for an interview, and based on that they can invest into your startup. So that is the first type of angel investor, and usually angel investor typically makes investment to the range of ranging from maybe some 10-15 lakhs to a few crores, like 2-3 crores, not more than that. Right? So that's what angel investment is. So this is the first step of investment. After the angel investment, the second step, when a company has grown slightly bigger, that is the seed investment. So in seed investment, it's usually institutions. There are a lot of funding agencies or funding institutions who specializes in seed investment. And in this investment, the ticket size is slightly higher. Maybe it will range from let's say around 2-3 crores Indian rupees to a few to maybe some 30-40 crores, not beyond that. So that is the second phase when the seed investment happens. So again, in seed investment, the company has slightly shown the product market fit at a small scale. So like initially we said, first stage is the idea, second stage is establishing the product market stage. So angel investor will help to bring in the investment that is required to establish this product market fit. And once it is done, the seed investment comes in, and then they help to do the initial stage of the scaling up, wherein they might, in two ways, they can either expand to other geographies or they can expand in the same place where they have started. So, but somehow it will help with the early stage of funding. So now, after the seed investment happens, it will take some time for the growth, and then comes in the series investments, which starts from series A, B, C, D, like that. It can go till the time when the startup wants to raise money, and all this funding will come at certain interval of time when the business is big enough to raise that sort of funding. Now again, the criteria will vary from company to company. A product idea which can be very, very promising technology wise, so that can actually raise a lot of money even before the product is launched. Wherein some companies will have to reach a certain scale of revenue After that, only people will be willing to invest into that company. So that way, it will vary from company to company, but ultimately, it is only that by trial and error, only people will know whom to raise funding from. So that's how the different ranges of investors are. And nowadays, it's not so difficult to reach out to investors. There used to be a time when reaching out to investors was quite tricky. You need to know people. You need to get into the right networks. But nowadays, everyone is in LinkedIn, so it's not that difficult. And the funding scenario is also not so similar to what it was maybe even 10 years back. Nowadays, it is very, very competitive, even from the investors' point of view, because investors also need to identify the right set of ideas and actually identifying them early so that they can make more money in the process. Right? So that is what the investors are. So I thought that these incubators and investors. So a lot of people do not understand the depth of these two ecosystem players who plays really, really important role in creating a startup. But having said that, it need not be that you always need to bring in external investors. Investors can always be self also. So there are examples of companies like Zerodha, like Zoho, who have not raised external funding. Still, they are quite big companies. Zerodha is the largest stockbroking company in India. So those kind of company can be built even without raising funding. But of course, in the startup world, a lot of people raise funding. So in incubation process, so what happens is that, I'll basically give you an example of what we do. My organization, IIM Calcutta Innovation Park. So this is basically a Section 8 company, which is under IIM Calcutta, and we are a startup incubation center. So what we actually do is we identify very, very early stage companies or founders, because most of our incubators are not yet registered also. Then we take them through different kind of things that I talked about. We groom them by teaching them things on business management. We teach them things about connecting to investors. We make them aware of what an investor pitch should look like, and also we connect them to different sorts of investors also. So that way we ensure that the people who gets incubated with us, so they actually comes out as a success. No, I won't say successful, because we work at a very early stage. So we usually tend to connect them to a next set of investors. And we actually are probably very recently we were named as the largest incubator by Startup India. And the reason is not because we incubate a lot of startups from the campus itself, but a lot of government projects also we undertake. So for example, the startup. But before getting into that, let me also tell what exactly government projects in the startup space means, because I think I should discuss a bit about the government's involvement as an ecosystem player also here. So what happens is that since at an idea stage or a very early stage, the availability of funding is not so easy. So like all the types of investment that I talked about, type of investors that I talked about, starting from angel and seed to series investors. When you have an idea at a very initial stage, right? So we have just had the idea, you have not yet started working on, the chances of raising money is very, very small. So that's the reality. Because if you see it from an investor's point of view, it's very difficult to establish the product market fit. Because at an idea stage, it doesn't make any difference, because idea will always look good to the person who has got the idea. But ultimately, that idea will be judged only by the customer. So an investor always feels more confident if the idea or a startup has some sort of a market validation, some sort of a product market fit established. Now, before that, but in order to get to that level, so it's a very difficult journey. Maybe around 99% people actually fails at that stage when people have an idea and then getting to the first round of investment. That is the reason why around 99% of the startups actually gets out of the ecosystem. So that's a space where government help comes in. So as we all know, that Indian government has been very, very has been playing a very, very important role in nurturing the startup ecosystem. Right from the time when Startup India scheme was launched, and after that, most of the states, they actually started coming out with their own version of the startup missions. So right from there to now, there are a number of schemes or number of programs that the various governments run, and as a part of that, what they do is that they help the incubators usually with funding and with other resources, so that incubators can identify these proper startups, and then they also can help to get them funded through the government media. So I'll just give you some examples of what we do. For example, the Assam startup, which is the startup mission of Assam, which is implemented by IIM Calcutta Innovation Park. So as a part of that, we take in almost every year, we take in around 70-80 startups, and we incubate them. We teach them all these things that I told about, the business essentials, and then we try to connect them to the investors. So that is one type of startup program that is done. Similarly, in Meghalaya, we have this program, Prime Meghalaya, which is again run by IIM Calcutta Innovation Park. Then same for Arunachal, and there are also other startups, other state governments whom also we help, and also we work very closely with Startup India also. And very recently, we actually launched this program, which I head, which is Northeast Entrepreneurship Development Program. It is under Northeastern Council, which comes under Ministry of Donor. And as a part of that, we will be selecting 270 entrepreneurs from Northeastern region, and we will be we'll be taking them through a incubation process of 6 months, and then we will also bring in some financial grants to them. So these grants can go up to around 10 lakhs, which is a good enough money for a startup if they want to validate their idea. So it is not good enough if for a startup which wants the money to scale up, but at least to go from the journey of having the idea to having a MVP or minimum viable product and establish the product market fit. This amount of money should be sufficient. So that is the reason why government comes in, they intervene, and then they help the startups to reach to the next level, and that way we also operate. So this is how an incubator like IIM Calcutta Innovation Park, they open. And in fact, most of the business schools, they have their incubators. Most of IITs, they have their incubators. NITs, they also have their incubators. Government also helps to establish something called as the Atal Incubation Center in many of the academic institutions. So they also get money to incubate, plus to fund to the startup. So this is what the role of an incubator is in the startup ecosystem. So now coming to the point, we do not have much time. So let me just take 5 minutes to summarize everything. And so if you are a startup, if you are, let's say, an aspiring startup owner or a founder, and your domain of expertise is in the technology space. And since this group is about artificial intelligence, so let me say it is in the artificial intelligence, some aspect of technology. So in that case, it actually, like I said in the very beginning, it actually is a better place to be, because most of the businesses today, or most of the startups, in somehow or the other way, they are already working with technology. So technology is something that most investors nowadays are open to invest. And also a good thing is that if you are a coder yourself, then your cost of development is not very high. So that is actually a really, really good place to be, because if you are, especially if you are a full stack developer, and you can conceptualize and you can code the entire app by yourself. You can launch it in Google Play. You can get the market validated, maybe just by investing a few thousand rupees, right? So that is why finding or starting a startup into technology space is very, very easy, is what I say. It's maybe difficult if you talk about more advanced kind of technology. Then you will have to invest a lot of time, or a lot of developers also you have to hire if you want to build technology. But a minimum viable product can be built at a very negligible cost, most probably. Right. So if someone wants to start a startup in the technology space, so my own take will be, we should never be discouraged by these notions that funding nahi milega and all those kind of things. We should just go and we should just try it with a minimum viable product. So because again, the other thing of economics comes into play is that if it is easy to build a prototype, that means a lot of people will be trying. So in the technology space, it is also very difficult to establish a product market fit, because a lot of people, if it is a simple product, then everyone probably will be trying with it, right? So again, it is very essential to in fact utilize all the focus, all the energy into building the first minimum viable product, and then to test it with actual customers before you actually venture out and keep looking for investors. And because that's a very time consuming activity. Even before going into an incubator, it is always better to build a very small version of your product and try it in the market. Then you can, once you establish that, once you just need a small amount of money, you can always look into these incubators, all this grant money that I talked about. You just need to do a bit of Googling, and you'll see lots of grants which are available from government. And some of it, I can say, Startup India Seed Fund is one of the biggest grant programs, which maybe runs some 2-3 times a year. Then from departments of Science and Technology, DST, MIT, so they have this Entrepreneurs in Residence program, wherein they pay monthly stipend of MIT has one EIL program in which they pay around 30,000 rupees to students who want to pursue entrepreneurship right after their college. For around 1 year, they pay this stipend. So if somebody wants to try it out, at least for a year or so, it's always a good place to be. I mean, today, with the kind of government support that we have, it is always a good place to be with all these kind of schemes and all this kind of support that is available. So after establishing some bit of product market fit, it is always better to look for some funds and then build some more on the product, get some more customers, and then you can start getting to the next set of investors, like the angel investors, seed investors, and the likes. So that is how a startup ecosystem or the startup technology startup life cycle actually looks like. So I think more or less that's all that I had to share. Let me pause here, and we can spend the remaining time if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, sir. I think we'll just take a look if you have any questions on YouTube.
Yeah, sure.
Abhigyan, I ask questions.
Yes, sir. So
Maybe you can check.
Go ahead. Yeah, I just received those. So I'll ask them here. Okay, so the first question that we have is, you have let's say you have an idea and maybe an MVP. When can you think for the angel investor? When can you think for the angel investor, and how to pitch the idea to them?
Yeah. So like I said, it will vary from idea to idea or product to product. So if your company is a very, very cutting edge kind of a technology. So I don't know if a lot of you might have heard about this. What is the startup name from this lady Elizabeth Holmes, right? So she was trying to build a startup wherein you can do, with a very small amount of blood, you can do multiple blood tests, right? So even before she launched the product, she was able to raise a lot of funding. So the question is, if you are building a very, very cutting edge kind of a technology, and if you are very sure that you can get a patent out of it, and you have spent considerable amount of time while doing the research. So at that point in time, the ideal point of raising an angel round will be while you already have the idea and you have done some research around it, right? So that is it. But for most of the other cases, an angel investment will come in only if we have established some kind of a product market fit. So we have built an MVP and we have tried it with a very small set of customers, and the customers have bought our product. They have started paying us, and they have a good review about our product. So that is the ideal time when we should try and go and reach out to angel investors. Now for pitching, pitching is altogether a different topic. It's a vast topic, in fact. But while pitching, if I may just summarize the best practices, so pitching is usually all about talking the future growth story, rather than spending more time about your past story. So you should concisely put all the past achievements and the salient points of strengths of your product into maybe 1 or 2 slides. And in that slide, you talk about what you have built. And then the remaining time, you talk about what you're going to build and what is your long-term vision. Because when angel investors comes in, they usually tend to come in for 20-30 weeks or so. When and during that time, they intend to get in the likes of some 2,000-3,000% kind of a return. So when they comes in, their expectation is not next 6 or 7 weeks, but it is about when that product has grown maybe 1,000-2,000 times from where that person has invested. So if I'm an angel investor and I'm evaluating a company, so the most important thing for me will be how big that company can be in the next 2 to 3 years when I can get an exit, not what you're immediately building. So while pitching, it is very important to have that mindset that what the angel investor might actually be expecting, and accordingly the presentation needs to be put. Again, it has to be a concise presentation. There's a lot of pitching decks which are available in Google. One very popularly used is from Robert Kiyosaki. He has a 10-slide pitching deck which can be used. It is actually used very by a lot of people, so that can be used. Which basically tells how you should define your system. But the essential point here is basically 2 things. One is to put less focus on what has been achieved so far, but more thing about what you are going to achieve. And second thing is to put more of objective information about your customer and the product market fit.
And the next question is, what is the startup scenario in Assam, and practically what are real challenges in case of Assam for a tech startup?
So first part, in fact, I was actually thinking of covering this during my presentation only, but I totally missed. Thanks for asking this question. So Assam, I would say it is at a very beautiful space or situation as far as our startup ecosystem is considered. So you'll be happy to know that in the recent this year's 2022 startup ranking, which Startup India publishes, Assam was 7th in the category A. Category A is basically the states which have a population of above 1 crore population. So out of all those states which were there, so Assam actually came at 7, and Assam was more than was ranked higher than even states like Rajasthan and all. So that itself tells the kind of government support that we have, and plus the kind of things that are happening in the Assam startup ecosystem. So which are really encouraging to see. I've seen, in the last few months, I have been associated with this program, and it was really heartening to see so many young startup founders, creating companies in different domains. Even in technology, around out of all the companies that we have incubated so far, around 17-18% is from the purely technology perspective. There are lots of good success stories also. There was one company which you can say My 3D Selfie. They have quite earned a name for themselves. So they build this 3D figurines for when you just WhatsApp them your photo, and you can help to build a 3D figurine. So they are now in nationally recognized brand. So I think they have worked with the likes of Charlie Chaplin and Marvel Studios, likes of that. So they're doing quite good, and they started from Assam. So similarly, lots of other startups which have come in. And talking about the challenge, so the first part of the question, to answer in a very summarized answer, is basically it's probably the best time to start up in I would say Assam. I would say in any of the northeastern states, because a lot of things are happening, lots of government support are there, and it's just about establishing your product market fit. It's just about working on your idea and being dedicated. So you can always build build a great product from here. And it's really heartening. We get, every year we run these programs for run these hunts, right? So for selecting the startups, so we get thousands of applications. So that also shows how entrepreneurial people have become, right? So people nowadays, startup is not anymore seen as a taboo. Maybe even 10 years back, so people thought that if someone is doing startup or entrepreneurship, that means he doesn't got anything else. So this is basically the last resort. It is not. It's no more like that. We can see bright students, bright professionals. They come and then they're doing fantastic work in the startup space. So a lot of technology startups which has done good from Assam itself. This company Vantage Circle, who makes a HR this HR system, HR reward management system, Vantage Circle. So it was probably one of the first startups which was founded around 2011. So they are now supplying to clients from lots of clients from US and and lots of other European countries also. There is this company Zaloni, which is basically, it is headquartered in the US. So they have here. So they have been doing quite good in the big data space. There is this company. So in the technology space, a lot of good things are happening, you can say, right? So not many names are coming to my mind right now, but if you do a Google or if you visit our page, which is startup.assam.gov.in, so there also you can see a lot of this startup success stories built in. Now, second thing about talking about the challenges. So as far as the technology startups is concerned, in my opinion, the biggest challenge is getting resources. So getting people to work. So that is still, I think a bit of a problem. This is not my opinion, but what I keep hearing from people who are my connections who are into this space. So that's what people say, that getting quality developers who have experience into new technologies. So maybe that is one key area which may affect the Assamese startups to some extent, but not at the very early stage, because early stage, the number of developers that you need, so Assam definitely can supply that much. But once you scale up, once you become, let's say, like a multi-million-dollar company, so at the time, the kind of resources that you need, so that supply of manpower probably is not available at this point in time in Assam. So that is one big challenge. But again, that challenge can now be overcome, and it is an effort that has been put by many entrepreneurs through the things of like remote working. So nowadays, remote working is quite popular. So a lot of people are trying that. So yes, resource may be one big challenge if you are starting a technology company from Assam. And another important thing is that a lot of people actually say that they are connected to the investors, because a lot of investors, the institutional investors, they are actually based. Most of them are based in Mumbai or Bangalore. So that way, the networking is a bit of a problem if you're staying in Assam. So it is very essential if you want to raise funding. If you are bootstrapping, then perfectly okay. But if you want to raise funding, it might be essential or might be helpful for you to spend some time in some of these places like Bangalore and Mumbai or Delhi, wherein you can network with some of the investors, institutional investors.
Thank you, sir. I think we have another question from Sufi, sir, which is related to this. So can you give a few examples related to AI or tech in Assam, if possible, who are doing great work?
Yeah, so AI, I think one example that it is, I don't know whether it will fall into AI or not, that my 3D selfie is basically a 3D printing thing, but the accuracy that they have is quite substantially high. So that is one. They are doing really fantastic work, and their efforts are also been appreciated by people from all across the globe, and plus also they have been able to raise multiple rounds of funding. So apart from that, in the AI space, not anything coming to the top of my mind. So a couple of other examples that I gave was on this Vantage Circle. So, but they are not, obviously their product has some bit of AI into it, because they are building this reward system for corporate HRs, and in that they have some elements of AI, but per se that is not a totally AI-based solution. But yes, in the software space also there are a lot of companies who are doing it. In the AI, yes, there are companies. There's one company who is using. They are into that. That's not Assam based. So these guys are from Meghalaya actually. So they have they are based out of Meghalaya, and they are doing. They are now expanding into Assam also. So they are into healthcare, and it's more or less like a combination of pharmacy, Potia, and lots of this medical supplies. So it's like a one-stop shop for all healthcare related activities. And then they are using AI to actually map the recommendation for the customers. So based on what kind of maybe the prescription should be shown to them. So in some aspects of it, they are using AI. So and AI is recently one another startup I met. Again, they were also from Meghalaya. So they were doing this tourism. They are basically a tourism company. So they are building a tourism app using which they will be. Based on your past history, and so they will be recommending new things. So more or less, I would say that AI per se. Just purely AI based companies are there in Assam to a large extent. Maybe some of them are there, but not so big that they come to the top of my mind. But a lot of other companies are there who utilizes AI as a part offering of their company.
Okay, and we have another question from Hidayat sir. So he's asking, could you give us an idea on quote unquote finding the right team for a startup?
Yeah, so that's actually the most important thing. It's about having the right team, and so it is always it's also perception, and to some extent it is true that if you have a team, you actually have more chance of being successful rather than if you are a solo founder working alone on this idea. And a lot of tangible and intangible aspects of this thing is there, because if you are surrounded by a team, it's always easy to go deeper into the problem, spend more time, because you are surrounded with also positive energy. It is essential to work. Now about finding the team, right? So the first thing about finding the team, and maybe even before the team, is about finding the right co-founders. So a lot of times, especially if you are starting up in the technology space, when you are going for investment later on, it is very essential. Any investors will give you preference if at least one of the founders knows how to code, or he or she is a developer by himself or herself. So the first core team, before building a team, it is important to have the first set of co-founders, right? So if you are building a product in the technology space, it is important, or I'd say it is absolutely essential for at least one person to be from technology background, and especially if that person is having some background on the particular technology in which that person is working, right? So that is number one. And apart from that, it is also important to have some domain expertise also in the founding team. So founding team is definitely the first part, and usually people. There are a lot of ways to find people. Obviously, the most widely used is from your own connections, from your colleges, from your childhood friends. So you get to know a lot of people who are into similar domains, who have already established themselves into those particular domains. You can always reach out to them, and they come on board. So that way you can get the right team. But again, so after finding the co-founders, it is next step is to find a core team. Core team will involve people from the important parts. For example, you will always be needing someone from sales. You will always be needing someone from operations. You will always be needing someone from running the technology or the hardware side of the technologies, building architecture and all. Right. So then, if you are a founder and you yourself you are an AI developer, then definitely you can lead that, but you can build a team next to you. So that sort of thing is important. But again, finding the right team usually So there are a lot of ways, like I said, you can mention through your connections. You can always hire people from by giving ads. But some of the important things to note while, especially in a startup, is that the culture is built from the first founding team. Not only the founder and co-founder, but also the initial team. So the kind of energy that the people gets in, the kind of motivation that the people will get in, those plays a very, very important role. So the first few people that you will hire, I mean, one aspect is obviously they have to be technically sound, or they have to be domain expert in the particular way. But also more important is that they should be able to see the same dream that you are seeing as a founder. So if you are a founder, you know what you are going to build now, and the kind of attachment that you will have towards your product, you need to imbibe the same attachment from each one of your team members. Otherwise, it's not just going to happen. Okay, so that is very. So when you asked about finding the right team, so right team basically means it's a team who feels the same amount of attachment, same amount of passion towards building the product and building the company. So I think that is the most important part. And apart from that, you can always balance out what kind of resources, what kind of expertise you need from the team. But again, that's a very important aspect of the team.
Yes, sir. And I think I had a question like related to this. That as you discussed about like building a startup, I wanted to know a little bit about the angle of like working in a startup. So what are the pros and cons about if a person wants to join a startup, but if it's like in a very early stage, or if it's so those things.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, because I have been, I worked in multiple startups, right? So of course, they're not at a very early stage. So by the time I joined, most of the startups were actually at a slightly later stage only. But let me give you, working in a startup and working in a proper company is actually very, very different volume altogether. Now, the good thing about working in a startup is that the kind of growth that you can have in your career, so that may be just, nothing else can give you that. Okay, it can be just next to the person starting the company. I've seen people, growing. Just engineering graduates with maybe 1 or 2 years of experience, they become being director in companies just a matter of 3-4 years. I've seen those kind of stories, right? So because in most of the startups, you get evaluated by your contribution to the company. They do not care about your past number of years of experience, or do not even care about the kind of institution from which you are in, you come, and you are mostly, evaluated based on whatever thing that you bring to the table in terms of your work towards the growth of the startup. So that is why working in a startup is actually very, very rewarding from your career perspective. So that is the number one positive. Second thing, nowadays most of the startups actually pays you well, right? And also a lot of them offers you ESOPs, which are a very, very essential thing, because bigger companies, after a certain level only, you will get ESOPs at the time of joining, or even at even up to the middle management level, you will never get the ESOPs. Right? So ESOPs are a very powerful tool of building your own wealth, because if you get ESOPs, this company does well. There are lots of stories where people become millionaire, or not billionaires, only millionaires by just working in some startups through their ESOPs. A lot of such stories when Zomato went online. A lot of the people who joined there early, they actually made a lot of money through these ESOPs. So that is the second good part about working in startup, is that you get ESOPs, employee stock options. Okay. Now, there is one negative thing I would say, what I have experienced in most of the companies, also I have learned from the startup, usually tend to have a very fast-paced kind of a culture. So some people tend to not get used to that culture, because when you are working in a startup, people expect that you will give your best. So you cannot be in a comfort zone. You are expected to come out of your comfort zone and try out things that you can do. So the good point here is that you get a lot of chance to make mistakes, learn things by yourself. So the kind of growth earlier I said about in the career, plus also about your own expertise also. So you can grow really, really fast in terms of your knowledge and all. But at the same time, sometimes people also get burned out, because depending on the kind of company, you might also be expected to work 12, 13 hours day also. So that is something which is quite common in the startup world. So yes, I would say working in a startup can be really, really promising, I would say, especially if it is in an early stage. But again, another negative is that if it is the more early stage the company is, more will be the chances of it not being successful. That's the harsh truth, right? Because very less amount of companies actually gets. So that is something. But I mean, at the early stage of your career, I don't see any reason why you should not take this kind of it's not even that big a risk, right? So you're just working with someone else, you get paid the salary anyway. So I mean, it's sharing some amount of the risk that the founder has taken.
Thank you so much for that answer. And I think we don't have any more questions on YouTube.
Okay, right.
I'll just check once again.
Yeah, I think we can wrap up. Yeah.
Okay, sir. So thank you so much, Rajarshi sir, for this session. I think it's the first time that we have had a talk regarding startups. So it's definitely going to be very helpful for a lot of our audience. So I thank you again on behalf of the entire team of IIM. Thank you again for this session. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, and thank you also for inviting me and getting to